Hello, welcome back. So, one thing you are going to see a lot is a whiteboard. I grew up canine. We did everything on a whiteboard, and there's a lot of things, that I have learned to adapt to, but I love my whiteboard. I've tried slides. I just don't. So we're going to go over some of the building blocks of scent work. We're not going to get too far into it. But we're going to go over some of the main concepts. And here we go. Let me get my whiteboard. See you in a second. All right. So, in this race to be, everyone wants to have a catchphrase and commercialize. It's a commodity. We've lost the basics. And in losing those basics, we lose what's important with scent work. And, like with all dog training, it starts off with classical and operant conditioning. So you have classical, right? I'm going to try real hard to get through this without cussing. Classical, using Pavlov. Bell, which is wrong. It wasn't a bell. It was a metronome. And a light. You think food? Dogs. Salivating. And most importantly, reflex. So Pavlov was a scientist that was actually a physiologist. He was actually studying digestion. And when he would go to feed the dogs, right before he would do it, he would have a metronome and a light. And those would come on right before he would give the food. So we already have in place, we have the metronome, which is an unconditioned stimulus, or a neutral stimulus, which is just stimulus without any prior learning. We have a stimulus of food, which the dogs know that food led to the reflex of them salivating. So, but he began to notice that after a while, the dogs would start salivating whenever this appeared. And this went from an unconditioned, why is that a C? This went from an unconditioned stimulus to a conditioned stimulus. And this became a conditioned reflex, in that when this appeared, this happened, even though this was not present. So the biggest thing with classical conditioning is it's a reflex. A good example, my father, when I was young, he used to tickle me right here under the chin. And yeah, okay. And I would, as I got older, he would, every time right before he was like, I'm going to get you. I'm going to get you. And whenever he would talk about classical conditioning with the officers there, he would, if I wasn't out training and I was in the classroom, he would look at me and he would just go like this, because he could be anywhere. All I had to do was this, and I would laugh uncontrollably and hate it when he did it in front of the officers. But that was classical conditioning in its purest form. He was at my wedding giving his speech, and he turns around and he just goes like this. And there I am in my wedding gown in front of my new in-laws and all of my guests, laughing uncontrollably. And my husband knew what was going on because he'd seen my dad do it before. But the rest of the family probably thought I was a lunatic. But as long as he did this, I couldn't stop. And, my kids now, I do the same thing. I go like this, and I do the same thing to them. So that's classical conditioning. It's a reflex. It's not something that we can control. That's why when they talk about, people that have had fear issues, they talk about counter conditioning, because they have to recondition them because it's a reflex. They can't control it. So they have to change that reflex. And then we have my favorite, operant. So, operant, of course, we think Skinner. Response, not reflex. Consequence. And a consequence does not have to be aversive or pleasant. Consequence is simply, a consequence doesn't mean aversive. It is aversive or pleasant, and it's either added or taken away. And no, it's not the 4 quadrants. Skinner had nothing to do with the 4 quadrants. Totally different set of scientists. That'll be another video. When he got that rat to press a bar, shaping. And so many other things that we use. Stimulus control. Prompting and feeding. Schedules of reinforcement. Quick side note, shaping. So there's a big misconception in the dog training world about shaping. Many call it free shaping. Free shaping and shaping are two completely different things. Shaping is through successive approximations. We have a behavior in the end that we want the animal to do. Free shaping. So, you know how you have these trick dogs and they're like, God, how did they get that dog to do that? Well, the dog has already been conditioned to a clicker. And let's say the dog does something that the handler or the trainer's like, that he likes. So when he does it, he clicks, he marks and pays. The animal does it again, he marks and pays. The animal does it again, he marks and pays. Then, right before the animal does the behavior, he names it. So let's say the dog's doing this backflip thing, right? So right before that dog's about to do it on his own, he says flip. And the dog does it. He marks and pays. And then right before the dog's going to do it again, he says flip, marks and pays. Does that multiple times. Then he says flip, or then, he'll let the dog flip and he doesn't say anything and the dog doesn't get paid. And then he says flip. The dog flips, marks and pays. That is stimulus control. He has now brought that behavior under stimulus control, because originally the dog was doing it because it wanted to. Now the dog is doing it because he's asking him to. And he's asking him to, and the dog says, when he says this and I do that, I get paid. That is free shaping. You don't have an idea of, you don't have a behavior in mind when doing it. It's when you see a behavior and you're like, I like that behavior. And then you take it and you bring it under stimulus control. That's free shaping. Shaping, successive approximations. Quick side note. So with Skinner, like I said, it's a response. You have a stimulus, you have a response, and you have a consequence. In classical, what the organism does is not governed by its consequences. It is governed by the stimulus. It's, you can have a person that, they're afraid of spiders, and you tell them, I'm going to put a spider on you, and if you don't stay still, I'm going to, take all your money. Well, you put a spider on them, they're still going to scream. They don't care. So a response is contingent on that consequence. So that's the main differences between classical and operant conditioning. One is a reflex, one is a response. But you still have, in both classical and operant conditioning, a conditioned stimulus and a conditioned reflex, which is classical, or response, which is operant. So the difference is when you have a stimulus, and you have a response or a reflex, it becomes operant when that reflex is reinforced or punished. It then becomes operant. So you have a conditioned stimulus and a conditioned reflex, a conditioned stimulus, and a conditioned response. One is simply stimulus response. One is stimulus response that has been strengthened by a reinforcer and is now under the control of that stimulus. That's when it's operant. So, how does that picture into scent work? Well, there's a lot of I mean, there's times that I see stuff with scent work, and it's like we've gone back into the 80s. And I understand, people talk about low drives and stuff like that, but you have two ways to pair odor. Before I even pair odor, I teach searching behavior. I'll take either treats or a ball, and I take their eyes away. I teach them to use their nose first, because in the end, that's what we want. We want them to use their nose, and we don't want to teach them odor and then go, oh, okay, now I'm going to teach you that you have to search for it. We want that searching to behavior. We want that nose to be first. We don't want their eyes to be a big part of it, because then you're never fully going to extinguish that behavior of eyes going first. So you have two ways. You have simultaneous, and you have delayed, or what's known as contingency based. So you have two different ways to pair odor. Simultaneous and delayed. Basically, classically and operantly. This is also called contingency based, or just good old fashioned operant conditioning. So simultaneous, the thing with simultaneous is, Skinner talks about the Miller-Konarski effect, and something that's very similar to it is, putting, when you're trying to teach a rat to press a bar, instead of using successive approximations, you put food on the bar and get them to do it that way. That's simultaneous, where they're doing the behavior and you're getting reinforced too. So they're you have the food, or you have the odor and the food. And it causes them to go towards it, to orient. Okay. The thing with this, there's a lot of things that can happen because of this. The food. Number one, when you have odor and food and get them searching for both, you have to extinguish the food. Because eventually you just want them looking for odor. The thing with extinction is spontaneous recovery. And you don't want that to happen during a search. You never know when it's going to happen. It could never happen. But, you don't want it to happen. When you're doing it with the food in there as well, you don't really know if they're smelling the odor. You'll see a lot of times people will have a box and they'll have the dog put their nose with it in it, or in it with the food and the odor together. Or they'll have the odor in a box and they eat the food. But we don't know if this is actually coming into play at all. And then you'll have where they don't have the food in there, they just have the odor. And when they stick their nose into the box, they get reinforced. But let me digress over here. With delayed conditioning, which is how I do it, you have stimulus response, stimulus consequence. You want to shape it. When that dog orients, when you have odor. And at this point, the way I teach it, I've already taught them searching behavior. So when I say the word seek, when I pretend to hide that ball and stuff, they're already knowing that this is the game where I smell. You put the odor out. As soon as they get there and they take, not only do they smell it, they get their nose on it and go to source. But you see that they take a good, and I'll show you a video of where a dog's smelling around, right around odor. But I'm not going to pay him because he's not actually smelling the odor. He's just smelling. He's doing the behavior of smelling. Once I see that they take a, then I reinforce. Because when you're over here and you start with the simultaneous, right? And you have the food and the odor in the thing. Well, then you see them, they'll have the little box and there'll be no food, just odor. And the dog just put his nose in the box. Similar to what they're doing here, going to the source, and they get reinforced. But are you reinforcing the behavior? Is the behavior because there's odor there? Or is it because there's a hole there and it's already been reinforced for putting its nose in the hole? Is it using its eyes or its nose? You don't know. Because all you know is that they are putting their nose into the box. They're putting their nose, they're putting that nose in the box. They're holding the nose in the box. The people are so intent on holding the nose right there. But they don't, if you watch the video sometimes, that dog's not even breathing. It's just frozen. The dog runs over. That dog didn't inhale. The dog ran and put his nose in there. He was using his eyes. He wasn't using his nose. Here, when they get to odor, and I recognize that, yes, they are, I reinforce. And you'll see me pair odor. I'll show, when the videos come up, you'll see me, I've got a 13, well, he's 14 weeks old at that point, a 14-week-old puppy that knows odor, that clearly shows that he knows odor in 30 minutes. That's how I can pair odor in 30 minutes. Because, like I said, it's contingency based. And when I started with taking away their eyes and having them do the searching behavior first, I was already teaching them to go to source because they had to go to source in the grass in order to get the reinforcer, the treat. They had to go and find it. So when you take away their eyes and you teach them searching behavior first, you're teaching them that they have to use their nose. They can't use their eyes. They don't see anything. They have to go to the source of the odor. They have to learn to work those J and Ds. They have to learn to work back and forth. They have to learn to go all the way to the source. And you're saying seek, so you're starting to bring that behavior under stimulus control. They start learning to use the wind. Their thresholds are already starting to be formed, because when you have just a hole in a box like that, the threshold is whatever you present. Here, with wind and everything, thresholds are different. You've got wind affecting it. You've got scent cones to work with. Here, it's nose in the box. That's it. So starting with simultaneous has been shown not to be effective. And I was watching a webinar the other day. It was saying, oh, well, sometimes you have to do that because you have a dog with really low drive, and the only way you can get him to smell is to have the food. Well, okay, so let's go with that hypothesis that they're trying to get the dog to put his nose in the box, is what they're really trying to do. If you have a dog that's got low drive and you're trying to get him to put the nose in the box and hope that they smell odor, and then you have to extinguish the food, which was the only reason in the first place that they were even coming close to putting their nose in the box, and they're low drive. You do that extinction wrong, you're going to lose the searching behavior altogether. As opposed to having the odor out, pretending to hide the food in different places, pretending to hide the ball, which if it's a ball, or you're going to have a higher drive dog, having them happen upon it, seeing that they take a whiff in, and reinforcing with the food. Because if that food is the only thing that's getting them to go, if you don't put that contingency in there quickly, things are going to go really slow, if at all. So once the dog understands the odor, which, like I said, doesn't take very long. Now the formula looks like this. Discriminative stimulus response, stimulus consequence. The discriminative stimulus is odor. The response is going to source and final response. And the consequence is they get reinforced. If something else shows up, like food, and they go to that, get nothing. So those dogs, the basis of all scent work is discriminative stimulus response, stimulus consequence. This is actually the basis of pretty much dog training. Right here. If your dog doesn't understand this, you're never going to get anywhere. That's why you see dogs, people are worried about obedience to odor and duration at the source and all this kind of stuff. If this dog understands it, that stuff comes naturally. People are like, how can I build confidence in my dog? If your dog has a confidence problem, that means they don't understand. And that's what I'm seeing a lot of in these scent work competitions is this right here. These dogs are not understanding it, and they're not understanding it because of the things that the handlers and trainers are being told to do. They're making it muddy. That's why your dog has no confidence. Doesn't understand. So there's your basics. You're going to hear me say discriminative stimulus, response, stimulus, consequence a lot. A lot. Because that's what it is. When that odor is present and I do this, this happens. That's all that dog needs to know. When I smell this, I do this, this happens. If I want my reinforcer, that is contingent on me going to source and giving final response. Me going to source and final response only happens when that odor is present. If something else is present, I get nothing. See you in the next video.